She was barefoot, drenched, and shivering under the city's unforgiving storm. Her arms wrapped around her stomach like it was the only thing she had left. Calum Hardwick almost didn't stop. Boston's most feared CEO had no reason to glance twice. He was on his way home from a meeting, chauffeured in silence, shielded from the world as always. His suits were tailored, his time priceless. His heart dead for years. But something made him look. Maybe it was the way she didn't beg, didn't speak, just stood there, soaked, invisible, nearly fading into the wall behind her. He rolled the window down, more out of impulse than kindness. "You need something?" She didn't meet his eyes. "Please, don't call anyone," she whispered. "I just need something to eat. For the babies." "Babies?" That single word cracked through 5 years of ice around his soul. He should have driven off. This wasn't his problem. He didn't do detours, didn't do people. But that night, with rain soaking the sidewalk and silence stretching between them, Calum Hardwick, the man who trusted no one, unlocked his car door and let a trafficked stranger into his world without knowing she was carrying his children. To the world he was untouchable, the kind of man who built skyscrapers by crushing competition and made silence feel like law. But power is lonely when there's no one left to come home to. Since the day Calum buried the woman he once planned to marry, he hadn't opened his door to anyone. Not emotionally, not physically. His penthouse had security tighter than a vault, and his heart even tighter. So why her? He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But as she sat silently in the back seat, soaked and exhausted, he couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror. She looked haunted, not just by fear, but by something deeper, shame. She hadn't asked for comfort, just food, just a place to sit for a moment where no one yelled or touched or took. Her hands trembled when he handed her a towel. Her eyes filled when she saw a plate of rice. She didn't even know how to accept safety. And yet, in that quiet corner of his apartment, wrapped in a blanket too big for her frame, she looked like someone who had once been loved and was terrified she never would be again. He didn't ask questions. He just watched her sleep from a distance that felt smaller every minute. What he didn't know was that she was about to turn his entire life upside down. At the top of Boston's skyline sat a building no one dared to enter without an invitation, Valen Enterprises. Its mirrored walls reflected power, prestige, and pressure. At its peak, in a suite untouched by time or emotion, sat the man behind the empire, Calum Hardwick. They called him the Ice King. His name stirred a mixture of fear and fascination across corporate circles. Clients respected him, rivals loathed him, employees? Most had never spoken to him directly and preferred to keep it that way. Every meeting he attended felt like a final exam. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. A single glance from him could shrink a grown man's confidence to ash. He was known for terminating executives mid-presentation, not out of anger, but because he didn't tolerate incompetence. No one ever asked him how he was doing. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they knew he wouldn't answer. Calum lived by routine: wake, gym, office, meetings, silence, numbers, reports, deadlines, sleep, repeat. He didn't keep personal photos in his office. There were no friendly group shots, no framed certificates, no mementos of the past, only precision. Glass walls, chrome finishes, black leather chairs. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt empty. No friends, no family, no softness. The man who once spoke with dreams in his voice had become a silent ruler in a glass castle. There was no room for laughter, no time for warmth. He told himself this was how legacies were built, alone, focused, unshaken. But even a fortress built of steel can echo. And at night, when the city lights flickered against his penthouse windows, those echoes grew louder. 5 years ago, Calum Hardwick wasn't like this. He smiled. He laughed. He danced barefoot on hardwood floors with a woman who painted stars on the ceiling because she believed a dream should always be above you. Her name was Leora, the light of his life, the only person who ever made his sharp world feel soft. She was fearless where he was reserved, colorful where he was classic. She'd sneak out during board meetings to bring him coffee with heart-shaped foam, scribble jokes in the margins of his reports, and kiss him on the nose before important calls. He used to hate interruptions, until her. She taught him how to live, and then she was gone. It happened without warning, a charity flight to raise funds for displaced children. Routine, safe, scheduled. Except it never made it back. Engine failure, mid-air chaos, headlines that blurred as he stared in disbelief at the screen. He waited for days, hoping someone had made a mistake. But the call came. No survivors. Something inside him broke, not with noise, but in stillness. He didn't cry publicly. He didn't scream. He didn't curse the heavens. He simply stopped being. After the funeral, Calum Hartwick disappeared from the world. Not physically. He still ran meetings, signed deals, closed billion-dollar contracts. But the man behind the name had vanished. What remained was a version of himself built for survival. He cleared out their apartment, moved into a penthouse that overlooked nothing personal. He canceled vacations, declined parties, and removed every trace of color from his life. He replaced music with silence. Leora's favorite sunflowers with concrete floors. Even her paintings, bright canvases of ocean skies and laughing women, were donated, as if he could erase the memory of ever being vulnerable. To the public, he was evolving, sharper, more focused, a machine. To those who knew him best, the handful who still dared to call, he was crumbling in slow motion, piece by invisible piece. He told himself emotions were distractions, that love was a liability, that he couldn't afford another loss. So he locked the door on the past and threw away the key. And with every passing year, he faded further into a life filled with power, but starved of meaning, until a soaked girl by a brick wall asked him for food. And for the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel empty. To outsiders, Calum Hartwick had it all. Forbes covers, conference keynotes, private jets, industry awards. He was the benchmark of success, the kind of man college graduates quoted in presentations and executives hoped to impress with carefully worded emails. He didn't answer most of them. His communication style was crisp and cold, stripped of emotion. The fewer words, the less risk. He didn't trust easily, not with contracts, not with people, and definitely not with emotions. Vulnerability, he believed, was the gateway to loss, and he'd already paid that price. Inside his penthouse, time moved differently. No laughter echoed down the halls, no scent of home-cooked meals, just silence, broken only by the hum of distant traffic and the low flicker of a news channel he never actually watched. His personal life? Non-existent. He didn't date, didn't entertain. His assistants managed his calendar with military precision. No surprises, no overlap, no unnecessary human contact. He kept things sterile because emotion was unpredictable, and unpredictable things hurt. Even his nightly routine was an act of control. Brushed teeth, checked alarm system, reviewed stock performance, stared out the window with a glass of something expensive he rarely sipped. Sometimes he would open Leora's last letter, the one she left on his desk before her flight. He never reread it fully, just held it. The world praised him. Investors called him a genius. But when his phone rang, no one ever called just to ask how he was. He trained himself to believe that was okay. But deep down, in moments of stillness, a gnawing emptiness clawed at him, the kind of ache that money couldn't dull. He had power, he had control, he had everything. Except connection. He never expected that the first person to pierce that wall wouldn't come wearing a designer dress or speaking boardroom jargon, but would arrive cold, frightened, and pregnant, asking only for food. They called her girl. No one asked for her real name. No one cared. She arrived in America on a promise, a job as a hotel cleaner, arranged by a man with a sharp smile and a folder full of fake documents. He told her she'd earn enough to send money home to her mother. He lied. The moment Serenia landed, her passport was taken, her name erased. She was placed in a van with other young women who looked just as confused, just as frightened. Some cried, others stayed silent. She did both. The building they kept her in didn't have windows, just rooms with metal doors, locks that clicked at strange hours, and instructions barked in languages she didn't understand. They didn't beat her, not physically, but every day felt like a punch to the soul. She was passed from house to house, forced to clean floors and scrub toilets in silence. She wasn't allowed to speak to the homeowners. She was told to enter through service doors, keep her head down, and leave before guests noticed her existence. Sometimes they fed her, most times they didn't. There was no schedule, no explanation, only orders. When she asked where her papers were, they told her to be quiet. When she asked to call her family, they said, later never came. She stopped trying to count the days. The calendar on the wall was from 2 years ago. No one updated it. But Serenia remembered who she was. Her grandmother had whispered her name to her in the dark, under the stars of a village long gone. Your name means song, she had said, because you were born during the evening prayers. You'll survive anything. Even silence. And so she did. Every night she clutched the worn rosary she had hidden beneath her blouse. She didn't ask for miracles, just strength. And strangely, strength came, not in grand ways, but in small moments, like remembering her name or keeping her thoughts her own. They couldn't steal those. But her body, that wasn't hers anymore. One night after being moved to yet another mansion, she found herself alone in the guest room bathroom, staring at a faint line on a test she didn't even know how to read. Her hand trembled as she read the instructions twice, then again. Positive. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat on the tile floor and placed both hands on her belly. "I'm still here," she whispered. "And now?" "So are you." When Serenia learned she was carrying life inside her, everything changed. She no longer feared punishment. She feared what would happen to the children if she stayed. The same people who stripped her of freedom wouldn't think twice about what she carried. Her life was disposable. She'd seen it happen to others. So, she ran. It wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect. She simply waited for one of the drivers to doze off during a mansion drop-off. The door was unlocked. The air was cold. She didn't stop to think. She just moved for the next 2 nights. She hid inside an abandoned construction site. Dust-coated beams, rusted scaffolding, broken floors. But it was hers, and no one gave orders there. She survived on stolen crackers and a bottle of water someone had tossed in the trash unopened. Her legs cramped. Her ankles swelled. Her stomach ached from both hunger and the tiny lives growing inside her. Still, she refused to stop. She wandered the city quietly, keeping to alleyways and shadows, stealing moments of warmth outside laundromats, bus terminals, and corner shops. Each time someone passed, she lowered her head. If anyone recognized her, they might return her. And she couldn't let that happen. She was barely 22. But she moved with the burden of someone twice her age, someone who had seen too much and hoped for too little. What kept her going wasn't hope. It was responsibility. She wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. There were 2 heartbeats tucked beneath her skin, 2 futures depending on her decisions, and no one was going to take them from her. Every night, she prayed the same words, "Just let me make it one more day." There were times she thought she wouldn't, like the evening her legs gave out on a public sidewalk. No one stopped. Just another stranger collapsed on a rainy curb, invisible. She curled against a wall, pulled her coat over her knees, and closed her eyes. Her rosary was still there, tangled around her wrist like a silent promise. She whispered softly, "If I can't make it, let them live." And still. Her eyes opened again the next morning. She never expected help, certainly not from a man like him, a man in a $1,000 suit, stepping out of a car that probably cost more than every home she'd cleaned combined. But as the rain poured and she shielded her belly, she looked up. And for the first time in weeks, someone looked back. The storm came down like a warning. Thick sheets of rain pounded the pavement, blurring the city lights into long streaks of silver and red. Horns blared in the distance. Drivers cursed under their breath. Umbrellas flipped inside out along the sidewalks. The city, alive and indifferent, moved on. Calum Hartwick sat in the back of his sleek black car, arms crossed, eyes locked on nothing. His driver navigated through narrow roads just off the main business district, an unusual detour caused by construction. Calum didn't care. Wherever they were going, it wasn't urgent enough to matter. He tapped a finger against the glass, jaw tight, mind buried beneath layers of unread emails, corporate projections, and that hollow throb that never fully left. Then, a blur. The driver swerved slightly to avoid a delivery bike that had darted across the intersection. Tires hissed against the water-soaked road. A wave of muddy rainwater exploded toward the sidewalk, drenching the figure curled near a brick wall. Calum's eyes followed the splash, expecting to see a drunk, maybe a junkie. But what he saw instead made his breath hitch. She didn't move. Not like someone waiting for pity. Not like someone hoping for change. She was still, hunched, quiet, gripping something under her coat. Her long dark hair was soaked and plastered to her cheeks. Her clothes clung to her small frame. She didn't lift her head, didn't flinch, just sat there, her back pressed against cold stone, as if she'd stopped expecting the world to notice she was alive. Calum stared for longer than he meant to. "Should I keep going, sir?" the driver asked. But Calum didn't answer. His hand moved slowly, as if guided by something unfamiliar, toward the switch. The window rolled down with a soft hum. He leaned closer, rain misting in over his shoulder. "Do you need help?" For a moment she didn't react. She didn't even seem to believe the question was meant for her. Then her eyes lifted, 2 weary orbs that looked older than her face. They were full of quiet panic, the kind that comes from too many nights of hiding and too few chances to breathe. "No police," she said, her voice barely above the storm. "Please, I just need food. For the babies?" Calum blinked. "Babies?" He glanced down instinctively at her hands, now wrapped around her belly. The air in the car shifted, something in his chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, the man who had everything couldn't think of a single thing to say. He could have looked away. He had before. Dozens of times. People in distress, begging at corners, sleeping under cardboard. The city was full of stories no one wanted to hear. But something about her made it impossible to ignore. Maybe it was the way she didn't plead, or the way she didn't shield herself from the rain. She just sat there, still, exhausted, and clearly too weak to run. Caleb didn't like questions without answers, and this one came wrapped in silence and storm. He unlocked the door. The click was soft, but in the silence between them, it sounded like thunder. She flinched, then froze. Her eyes darted from his to the open door. Suspicion, confusion, and a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Possibility. Still, she didn't move. He didn't blame her. "You don't have to come," he said calmly, "but the rain isn't stopping, and you don't look like you can stay out here much longer." Then, slowly, she stood. Her movements were cautious, deliberate, like someone who'd been punished for existing too loudly. As she stepped toward the car, her arms remained curled around her midsection. Every footfall looked like it required more strength than she had left. She slid into the seat without speaking. The door closed. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the leather interior. She didn't look at Caleb, just stared out the window like she expected to be thrown out before the engine even started. He glanced sideways. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She was shaking. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Probably both. "Home," he told the driver, voice low. They drove in silence. Halfway to the building, she whispered, "Why?" Caleb turned to her. "Why what? Why are you helping me?" He didn't have a clean answer. He didn't know. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was her eyes. Or maybe it was the way she said babies, like they were all she had left in the world. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But you don't look like you belong on the street." She gave a tight nod and returned to the window. Caleb didn't press further. He was used to silence. But something about hers felt different. Not cold, not defensive, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after too many people have stopped listening. By the time they reached the building, she'd fallen asleep, her head resting gently against the window, her hands still covering her belly like a fragile shield. Caleb stared at her for a moment longer before stepping out into the rain. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her past. But as the elevator rose toward the top floor, he realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he wanted to know. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime. Serenia stepped out hesitantly, eyes darting across the unfamiliar hallway. Marble floors, clean air, lights that didn't flicker. It felt less like a home and more like a place people only entered when invited, and she had no idea if she truly was. Caleb didn't say much, just walked ahead, coat dripping, shoes silent. When she crossed the threshold into his penthouse, her breath caught. Not because it was lavish, though it was, but because everything was so still. The space was enormous, yet quiet. No music, no chatter, no family photos. Just glass, steel, soft lighting, and air that smelled like polished wood and something she couldn't name. "Guest room is to the left," Caleb said, nodding toward a corridor. "There's a bathroom inside. Help yourself. I'll have someone bring you fresh clothes." She stared at him, unsure if this was real. He noticed the hesitation and added, "No one here will hurt you." Then he left. The room she entered was larger than anywhere she'd slept since arriving in the country. A full bed, clean linens, a closet filled with neatly folded robes and towels. She touched the fabric like it might disappear. The bathroom had soft white walls, glowing mirrors, and water pressure she hadn't felt in years. The moment she turned the knob and warm water rushed over her skin, she covered her mouth and cried. Not loud sobs, just slow, breathless weeping, like something heavy slipping off her shoulders drop by drop. After the shower, she returned to find a tray on the nightstand. Steamed rice, grilled fish, a small bowl of fruit. She didn't touch it at first, just stared. Then, carefully, she picked up the fork. She ate slowly, reverently, as though someone might walk in and take it all back when she finished. She sat on the edge of the bed and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for herself, but for her unborn children. That night, wrapped in a thick comforter she hadn't asked for, she closed her eyes without fear for the first time in months. She didn't sleep well, not yet, but she didn't sleep with one eye open either, and that was progress. The next morning, she woke up to sunlight peeking through drawn curtains. A folded set of clean clothes sat on a chair near the bed, soft pants, a long cotton top, and slippers that actually fit. Just space. She stepped into the hallway, unsure if she was allowed to. The apartment was silent, but the air no longer felt cold. She followed the scent of coffee until she found the kitchen. Wide, spotless, all chrome and dark marble. Caleb stood at the counter, shirt sleeves rolled up, stirring something in a mug. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Morning," he said, voice even. She hesitated. "Good morning. Hungry?" She nodded slowly. He gestured to the bar stool. "Sit. "I'll make something." She did, stiff, uncertain. Her hands stayed folded on her lap as he cracked eggs into a pan. The smell made her stomach turn, but not in a bad way, just... Too many months of eating scraps made real food feel foreign. When he slid the plate in front of her, she whispered, "Thank you." He simply nodded and returned to his coffee. This became their rhythm. No forced questions, no sudden closeness, just quiet mornings, short glances, and unspoken boundaries neither crossed. He left the apartment most days, but when he returned, he always brought something. A scarf when he noticed she was chilly, a pair of shoes after realizing she only had the worn sneakers she ran in, a small music player with soft classical tracks she could play in the guest room. She never asked for anything, but slowly she began to accept what was offered. And in return, she started to move with a little more ease. Her shoulders weren't always hunched. Her steps grew steadier. She sat on the couch one afternoon instead of staying in her room. Another time, she cooked rice the way her grandmother used to make it and left a plate for him on the counter, unsure if he'd eat it but wanting to give something back. He did eat it, didn't say anything, just left the empty plate in the sink with a folded napkin. Their lives didn't intersect loudly. They brushed past each other gently, like waves in shoreline, not crashing, just reaching, again and again. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, something was changing. She didn't just feel safe. She was starting to feel seen. Calum Hartwick was a man of habits. He didn't miss meetings. He never skipped gym sessions. He answered emails before sunrise and signed contracts with precision before breakfast. Everything in his life served a purpose, but now he found himself noticing things he never used to. The way the lights in the hallway were dimmed differently since she'd arrived. She was sensitive to brightness after long nights without rest. The soft hum of music playing through the speakers. She seemed to calm when violins replaced silence. Even the plants she watered quietly on the terrace. He'd never realized how dull the space had felt without them. He started arriving home earlier. It wasn't a conscious choice, at least not at first, but he found himself wrapping up meetings faster, skipping late dinners, even pushing back conference calls just to be back before nightfall. One evening, he walked in to find her sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, reading a children's book she'd found in one of the guest drawers. Her lips moved softly, reading aloud to the swell of her belly like a lullaby made of pages. She didn't hear him enter, and he didn't announce himself. He just stood there, watching. There was something about the scene, the warmth, the stillness, the way she gently laughed when the baby kicked, that gripped him harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. She looked up suddenly and met his eyes. "Oh, sorry," she said, reaching to turn the music down, as if she'd broken some rule. "No," he said, stepping forward. "Don't stop." She blinked, surprised. I haven't seen anyone do that in a long time," he added quietly. She smiled, not wide, not bold, but real. "Sometimes they respond," she said, resting a hand on her stomach. "I think they know when someone's listening." He nodded, unsure why the words affected him so deeply. That night, he didn't head straight to his office. He stayed in the living room, seated across from her, listening as she read another page aloud. The characters were silly, the plot simple, but the sound of her voice filled the apartment in a way he didn't know he'd been missing. Later, he found himself standing outside her door, hand paused just before knocking, for no reason other than wanting to say goodnight. He didn't knock. He just stood there a moment, then turned back toward his own room. The next morning there were 2 mugs on the counter instead of 1. He didn't ask why, and she didn't explain. But when their hands brushed as she passed him his coffee, he didn't pull away. He looked down and smiled. There was no grand confession, no dramatic touch, just a shift. Subtle at first. It began with the way Serenia lingered in the kitchen after breakfast, no longer rushing to disappear down the hallway. She started humming softly as she wiped counters. Nothing scripted or performative, just quiet melodies from a childhood no one had asked her about. Calum noticed, not just the sound, but the stillness that followed when it stopped. He realized he preferred the humming to silence. She began asking questions, small ones. What time he usually got home, whether he preferred tea or coffee, if it was okay to open the windows when the weather was nice. And he answered, always simply, always calmly. The distance between them wasn't gone, but it no longer felt like a wall. More like a hallway they were both slowly walking down from opposite ends. They began sharing meals. At first, breakfast, then lunch on the weekends. Eventually, dinners by the window, the city's skyline glittering behind them. She still didn't eat much, but she no longer looked over her shoulder before picking up her fork. One night, she made soup, the kind she remembered her mother making on rainy evenings. Calum tried it and said without flourish, "It's good." She smiled into her bowl. He didn't elaborate. He never did. But she'd begun to understand his language, the way his silences meant more than most men's words. He'd leave books outside her room. She'd organize the pantry when he wasn't looking. He'd fold the blankets she left on the couch. She'd refill his mug without being asked. A rhythm formed. Not forced, just steady. And every so often their hands would brush as they passed one another something. A cup, a dish, a folded towel. Each time they paused, just slightly, as if those touches echoed louder than their words. She caught him looking once, really looking, when she leaned over to grab a fallen spoon from the floor. She stood slowly, met his eyes, and saw something there. Not hunger, not pity. Warmth, interest. That, permission. As if he was waiting too, unsure. That night, she stood in the hallway outside his door for longer than she meant to. Listening, not for sounds, just for courage. She didn't knock. But the next morning, her teacup was sitting beside his, side by side, like a conversation waiting to be had. Can you feel the spark forming between them? Drop A in the comments if you're rooting for this unlikely couple. The rain returned that evening. Not in torrents, just a gentle, steady tapping against the windows, the kind that filled silence without interrupting it. Serenia was curled on the couch, a worn novel open on her lap. Calum stood near the window, nursing tea he didn't really want, lost in thought. I used to love the rain, she said softly. He turned. Before. Everything, she added. It made the world feel slower, safer. Back home, it meant time to rest. It was the only time my grandmother would stop working. Calum didn't respond right away. Then, as he stared out at the drizzle painting streaks on the glass, he said, It used to mean something to me, too. She looked up. What did it mean? He paused. That I didn't have to explain why I was quiet. Serenia smiled, gently, knowingly. You don't strike me as someone who explains anything, even when it's sunny. That drew a breath of amusement from him. Almost a laugh. Almost. She set the book aside and folded her legs beneath her. Do you ever miss before? She asked. Before what? Before your life became so measured. He turned, leaning against the frame. Measured is better than chaotic, but it's also lonely. She hadn't meant it to sting, but it landed somewhere beneath his ribcage anyway. I don't do well with chaos, he said after a moment. I don't do well with cages, she replied. They both fell silent. Then, something unexpected happened. Serenia reached down and pressed his hand to her belly. It wasn't planned. She just did it, as if the weight of the silence begged to be broken with something living. He didn't move, didn't pull away, and then he felt it, a nudge, faint but real. He looked at her, eyes wide for just a second. They move more when I'm calm, she whispered. They feel it when I'm safe. He glanced down again, hand still resting gently, unsure of how something so small could steal the air from his lungs. No one's ever felt them before, she added. Not since. Her voice drifted. You're the first. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her, close but not too close, enough to feel the warmth between them. Do you have names for them yet? He asked quietly. She shook her head. No, I was waiting for a day that felt like the future was possible. Calum looked at her then. Really looked. Not just at her face, but at everything she'd carried. The trauma, the strength, the soft resilience that somehow kept her standing despite everything. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he said. Serenia blinked fast. People say that when they don't know what else to say. No, he said. I mean it. You could have disappeared. But you didn't. She looked down at her hands, quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, Neither did you. The next few days moved like a soft melody. Their routines began to intertwine without effort. She left small notes near his coffee cup. Questions, observations, sometimes even jokes. He responded in his own way, adjusting the thermostat to her comfort, asking if she wanted to choose the music at dinner, leaving a light on in the hallway because she said she hated the dark. One evening, after a quiet meal, Calum stayed seated at the dining table longer than usual. Serenia was across from him, turning a cup in her hands, not drinking, just thinking. You don't ask me much, she said. I don't need to know everything to understand someone. But most people want the whole story. I'm not most people. She met his eyes. What do you think I am? He looked at her for a long time, then said, I think you're surviving in the only way you know how, and somehow you still manage to be kind. Her fingers stopped moving. The room settled around them, as if even the air paused to listen. Later, she found herself in the living room again, curled up with a blanket, watching the flames inside the electric fireplace flicker behind the glass. He joined her. No conversation, just quiet proximity. Eventually she spoke. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Have you ever been in love? His jaw tensed. Not in irritation, in memory. Yes, he said. A long time ago. What happened? She died. A beat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "So am I." They sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like an agreement. That they both knew pain, that they'd both lost versions of themselves they could never get back. And yet, here they were. When Serenia stood to go to bed, she stopped just before leaving the room. "Would it be okay if I sat outside for a bit? The terrace, just for some air?" He rose immediately. "I'll come with you." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to. I want to." Outside, the breeze was gentle. The city stretched endlessly before them, blinking and alive. Serenia stepped to the railing, letting the wind lift her hair from her shoulders. Calum stood beside her. Neither spoke. Then softly she said, "I don't remember the last time someone stayed beside me without asking for something." He looked at her. "I'm not here to take anything from you." She nodded slowly. "I know." Their eyes met, and for once neither looked away. He stepped closer. Not abruptly, not boldly, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. She didn't flinch. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught. Then, as naturally as breathing, his forehead rested gently against hers. No pressure, no rush, just closeness. Their lips met, slow, careful, and deeply human. It wasn't a kiss born of desire. It was two people holding each other through a storm that had already passed, just to make sure it wouldn't return. When they parted, her eyes shimmered. "I'm not broken," she said. "I never thought you were," he replied. It began with a look, a single glance out the living room window that held too much fear. Calum noticed it instantly. Serenia had frozen mid-sentence, her fingers gripped around her glass of water. Her eyes locked on something far away, not just outside the apartment, but inside her memory. He turned to follow her gaze. A van, parked across the street, unmarked, ordinary to most, but not to her. She stood quickly. "I need to go lie down." Calum didn't move. Who was in that van? Her back was already to him. "No one." "Serenia." She paused, then kept walking. He didn't follow. Not right away, but hours later, long after the sun had dipped behind the skyline. He found her in the guest room closet, sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide and unblinking. He crouched beside her. "Talk to me." Tears welled up, but she blinked them back. "I didn't want this to come here. I didn't want to ruin what you gave me." "You haven't ruined anything." She looked up. "They're looking for me." His heart slowed. "Who?" "The men who brought me here. I escaped, but they don't forget. Girls who run, they don't last." Her voice was so calm it scared him more than if she had screamed. "I saw them 3 days ago, at the bus terminal. I pretended not to notice. I thought it was coincidence. But that van? It's been there before. I've seen it on different blocks. It follows. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because if they find me, they'll come for whoever helps me. That means you." Calum sat back. The room felt colder somehow. "I have money. I can relocate you." She looked straight at him. "I don't want to run anymore." He stared at her. She continued, voice shaking now. "I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just made it to the birth, maybe they'd forget. Maybe they'd find someone else, but they don't. They keep tabs. Girls who leave cost them money, and they don't like losing anything." Calum's jaw tensed. "They know I'm pregnant," she whispered, "and that makes it worse." He stood slowly. For the first time since they met, his expression shifted from calm to something sharper, not fear but fury. Quiet, burning fury. "Did they ever hurt you?" Serenia hesitated, then nodded once. Calum didn't ask how. He didn't need to. The answer was already etched in every silence she'd carried. "You are never going back there," he said. "I know," she whispered, "but they won't stop. Neither will I." It wasn't a promise. It was a fact. That night, Calum didn't sleep. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, staring into the pulse of the city. Behind him, files lay open. His laptop glowed with lists, encrypted emails, names tied to private contracts, addresses, and shell companies. This wasn't just about protecting someone anymore. This was personal. He started making calls not to the police, not to lawyers. They were too slow, too bound by red tape. Calum had spent years building connections most people never saw. People who knew how to dig quietly, how to trace movement, and how to make certain things stop without flashing lights or cameras. By morning, a former security chief from Valon Enterprises had been hired on contract. By noon, 2 private investigators were dispatched to look into known trafficking networks operating through Boston's luxury service sector. By evening, Calum had names, faces, flight logs, apartment rentals paid in cash. One of the license plates linked to the van outside had already been flagged 3 states away. It wasn't enough. So he pushed harder. He offered bonuses for speed, access to databases most civilians couldn't touch. Discretion was non-negotiable. No one could trace this back to Serenia. She'd been through enough. But he wouldn't stop until every door they'd ever walked her through was closed, permanently. Back at the apartment, Serenia noticed small things first. Security cameras, now repositioned. The front desk staffed 24 hours. A guard stationed in the parking garage, polite, unassuming, but alert. She didn't ask questions. But she knew. One evening, Calum came home later than usual. His sleeves were rolled, his tie askew, a rare disheveled look. He barely spoke as he poured himself a glass of water and leaned on the counter. She approached slowly. "What happened?" He looked up at her. "I found them." Her breath caught. He continued. "They're part of a supply network that launders labor through cleaning services and staffing agencies. All the right paperwork. All the wrong people. And? Most of them will be behind bars within 2 weeks. The rest will vanish when they hear who's involved." She stared at him. "You did that?" He nodded. "But why?" Calum exhaled slowly, then looked at her with a softness she hadn't seen in him before. "Because I couldn't sit by and do nothing. Because you matter. Because they don't get to win." Her throat tightened. "You could have walked away. I know. You could have sent me somewhere else. I still could, but you won't know." The room fell silent. Then he reached for her hand, gently. "Let them come," he said. "They won't get close. Not anymore." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Not as someone seeking protection, but as someone choosing to trust. He held her there. And for the first time in his life, Calum Hartwick didn't feel like a man controlling outcomes. He felt like a man fighting for something real. Calum's office no longer resembled a workspace. It looked like a war room. Blueprints, name charts, paper trails. Everything he'd compiled in silence was now part of a living map. Serenia never asked for details, but she knew. She could see it in the shift of his shoulders, in the fire behind his usually unreadable stare. This wasn't charity. This was war. He worked around the clock, hiring teams, tracing financials, linking every shady agency that had ever passed under the radar of regulators. With the help of investigators and retired intelligence contacts, he tracked down 5 properties across state lines used as temporary holding points for women trafficked through fake visas and fraudulent cleaning contracts. Inside those buildings were young women like Serenia, some barely adults, some carrying their own unborn children, all stripped of dignity and forced into servitude under the cover of wealth. They needed more than justice. They needed rescue. So Calum didn't wait for bureaucracy to catch up. He organized a coordinated tip-off, carefully synchronized with a task force from a national nonprofit that handled crisis extractions. It had to be airtight. No leaks, no false alarms. One mistake, and the victims would vanish again. And Calum had made a promise. He would not lose another woman. The sting operations began just before dawn across 3 cities. By noon, 21 women had been pulled from dangerous conditions. 2 were hospitalized. 3 had active threats against their lives. The others were finally breathing fresh air without fear. Calum watched from a distance, not because he was hiding, but because he knew when presence helped and when it didn't. Later that day, a girl no older than 19 whispered to one of the medics, "Is he the one who did this?" The medic nodded. She stared at Calum from across the street. Then, slowly, she mouthed, "Thank you." Calum didn't respond, just nodded, the smallest movement of a man who finally felt the weight of doing something right. But peace doesn't come without noise. By the next morning, headlines were everywhere. Billionaire CEO tied to underground Maid trafficking ring? Valon Enterprises boss linked to pregnant escapee who was the woman Calum Hartwick is hiding. The media spun the story like wildfire, accusing, speculating, twisting. Some outlets called it a scandal. Others tried to imply scandalous behavior behind closed doors. He was a man in power with a woman in hiding. The tabloids didn't need facts to run with that. Investors panicked. Board members scheduled emergency meetings. Shareholders demanded statements. But Calum didn't flinch. He walked into his next board meeting without an apology. When asked to explain himself, he simply said, "If protecting people from modern-day slavery is a liability, then I'll happily take the loss." Gasps followed. A few walked out. Others stayed silent. He didn't care, because he knew what mattered now, and she was waiting for him at home, reading stories to the twins she hadn't yet met, safe because he chose to act. Would you risk everything to protect someone you love? Let us know in the comments. The press conference was held in the atrium of Valon Tower, a sleek, glass-covered space Calum had once reserved for product launches and financial milestones. Today, it served a different purpose. The moment he stepped onto the stage, cameras flashed like lightning. The room buzzed with speculation. Dozens of journalists sat with notepads ready, microphones clipped, live streams running. His legal team had begged him to cancel. His board had warned him not to speak. His PR team handed him a carefully prepared statement. He never looked at it. Dressed in a simple dark suit without his usual tie or pocket square, Calum walked up to the podium, placed both hands on the sides, and exhaled. No script. Just truth. "You've all seen the headlines," he began, voice calm but clear. "And I'm not here to deny anything. I'm here to explain everything." A murmur moved through the crowd. "Yes, I gave shelter to a woman who had nowhere else to go. Yes, she was trafficked. Yes, she was pregnant. And no, I didn't know her name the night I brought her home." He paused. "Let it hang. I didn't ask for her past. I gave her space to breathe. And when I realized the danger she was in, I chose to act, not as a businessman, but as a human being." More shifting in chairs, pens scratching faster now, he continued, voice growing stronger. "Too many people with power look away. I did too for a long time. I closed my doors, shut out the world, and told myself it wasn't my job to fix what I didn't break. But when you see someone trembling on a sidewalk, begging not to be seen, and still trying to protect what little they have left." He looked up, jaw tight. "You can't walk away from that. Not if you still have a soul." Someone in the back cleared their throat. Another journalist leaned forward. Calum went on. "I used every resource I had, not to silence the press, not to protect myself, but to expose a network of abuse that's been hiding in plain sight for years. And I do it again." Flashbulbs exploded across the front row. You can write your headlines, you can speculate about the relationship. But the truth is simpler than that. He stepped back from the podium, letting the silence work for him. "That woman saved me, not a gasp, not a whisper, stillness. I was a man who hadn't felt anything in 5 years, not joy, not loss, not even anger. I buried everything with the person I once loved, until someone with nothing reminded me that I still had something to give." He took a breath, steady and deep. "She gave me a reason to care, and in return I did what I should have done a long time ago. I stopped looking at numbers and started looking at people." Reporters began raising hands. He nodded to one. "Is she still in your home?" the woman asked. "Yes." "Do you have feelings for her?" He didn't flinch. "Yes." More hands. Another question. "Is it true she's carrying your children?" A pause, not defensive, not embarrassed. "Yes." The room burst into noise, questions piling on top of each other. But Calum raised a hand. "One more thing," he said. "Then I'm done." The room quieted. "I'm starting a foundation, not as a press stunt, not as damage control, but because I've seen what silence costs. The Velon Initiative will fund emergency housing, legal aid, trauma counseling, and education for survivors of trafficking and abuse. This is no longer just about one woman. It's about the many who are still unseen." He stepped back, nodded once, and walked off the stage. No security escort, no handlers. Just a man finally walking in the light, no longer hiding from his past, and no. Back at the apartment, Serenia watched the entire broadcast on a small screen from the guest room. Her hands trembled as she muted the final moments, eyes glassy. He hadn't asked her permission. He didn't need to. He told the truth, all of it. When he returned that evening, she was waiting by the door. She didn't say a word. She simply reached for his hand and placed it gently over her belly. This time the babies didn't kick, but something else stirred, something steady, safe, and permanent. The contractions began just after midnight. At first, Serenia thought it was nothing more than the usual aches. Her back had been sore all week. She hadn't slept more than a few hours each night, and the twins had been unusually active that day. But then came the second wave, stronger, and the third, closer. She sat up, pressing both hands to her belly, her breath sharp and shallow. The world tilted, not from fear, but from the realization it was time. She called out once, just loud enough to echo down the hallway. Calum was there in seconds. He didn't speak, didn't panic. He knelt beside her, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and asked only one question. "Are you ready?" She nodded, gripping his hand tightly. He didn't let go. The hospital room was quiet, dimmed and calm. Calum had made arrangements weeks before. Private suite, trusted doctors, soft lighting, no cameras, no chaos. Only peace. Serenia labored for hours. There were moments when pain etched across her face, sweat running down her temples, teeth clenched in silence. But she never screamed, never begged, not even once. Calum never left her side. He wiped her forehead, whispered words of strength, held her hand until his fingers went numb. When she broke into tears from exhaustion, he leaned close and said, "You've already survived the worst. This is just the beginning." And then, a cry, sharp, clear. clear, new, a girl. Moments later, another, louder, stronger, determined, a second girl, 2 tiny lives, born minutes apart but connected in ways no one could ever measure. The nurses cleaned them gently and placed them into Serenya's arms. Her body shook with emotion, her lips moving silently as she traced her fingers along their cheeks, counting 10 fingers, 10 toes, whispering soft words in her language, promises only a mother could understand. Caleb stood a few feet away, frozen. He'd faced hostile takeovers, sat across from world leaders, navigated billion-dollar deals without blinking. But this brought him to his knees. One of the nurses gently lifted the smaller twin and placed her into his arms. She weighed nothing. And everything. He looked down at her, eyes barely open, her fist clenched around the corner of his shirt like she already knew who he was. He felt something break inside him, and something else begin. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're safe, and I will never let you go." He didn't care about the headlines anymore, or the investors, or the empire. This was the only thing that mattered now. Don't forget to like and share this video if this moment melted your heart. Not every story begins with love. Some begin with loss, others with fear, and some, like this one, begin at the lowest point, when there's no light, no safety, and no reason left to hope. Serenya didn't arrive in Caleb's life with flowers or laughter. She came soaked, shivering, and broken, not because she lacked strength, but because the world had taken more from her than most people could bear. And Caleb? He wasn't waiting for anyone. He'd already buried the part of himself that felt, that trusted, that dreamed. He didn't believe in second chances, because in his world, second chances didn't exist, only results. Yet somehow, their paths crossed. By accident? Maybe. By grace? Definitely. One act of kindness, one moment of hesitation, opened the door to everything. A girl who had been discarded was finally seen, and a man who had given up on feeling felt again. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins with a meal left on a counter, a light left on in the hallway, a glance held a second too long. It creeps in like warmth after a long winter, quietly, patiently, completely. Serenya never asked for sympathy. What she wanted was simple, peace, a place where her name mattered, where her story wasn't a sentence, but a beginning. She carried her trauma not as a badge, but as a reminder of what it took to survive. And Caleb? He didn't rescue her. He stood beside her while she rescued herself. But in doing so, she saved him too. That's the beauty of love born out of ashes. It's not desperate or loud. It doesn't come to impress. It comes to restore. And that's what makes it powerful. Let's talk about what this story really teaches us. First, kindness doesn't require an explanation. Caleb didn't need to know Serenya's entire history to help her. He didn't demand her past before offering a warm place to rest. Sometimes compassion starts not with information but with instinct and the willingness to act. Second, the strongest people are often the quietest. Serenya didn't shout her pain. She carried it, buried it, and chose to keep moving. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. And when someone finally listened, she began to speak again. Third, power means nothing if it's not used to protect. Caleb had wealth, status, influence, but none of that mattered until he used it to shelter, to defend, and to uplift. He proved that influence isn't about control, it's about responsibility. Fourth, love is not always planned. It doesn't arrive on schedule or follow the rules. Love sneaks in through small doors, a borrowed book, a quiet dinner, a shared glance in the hallway. It doesn't wait for the right moment, it creates the right moment. Fifth, everyone has something to give. Even when Serenya had nothing, no home, no title, no safety, she still had something sacred, her courage, her gentleness, her ability to keep going. And that was enough to change everything around her. Finally, second chances are real, not just for those who've been hurt, but for those who've hardened themselves. Redemption is possible. For the broken, for the bitter, for the ones who never thought they'd feel again. Maybe you're watching this story today and seeing a part of yourself. Maybe you've been Serenya, tired, voiceless, trying to hold on. Or maybe you've been Caleb, cold, closed off, scared to care again. Wherever you are, there's always a door waiting to be opened. There's always someone worth helping. And there's always a version of you that's waiting to come alive again. You don't need a perfect past to deserve love. You just need the courage to stay when someone opens their heart. Because in the end, the greatest rescue isn't from danger. And the greatest kind of power is the power to love anyway. Love isn't always polite when it arrives. It doesn't knock at the right hour or wait until we're ready. Sometimes it shows up in the middle of a storm, drenched, trembling, asking only for shelter. That's how their story began. A man who thought he had nothing left to give. and a woman who had nothing left to lose. Calum Hartwick, once the most untouchable figure in Boston, now wakes up to tiny cries in the middle of the night, not annoyed, but honored. He no longer rushes to skyscrapers. He rocks babies to sleep. He learns lullabies in a language he doesn't speak. He smiles more than he ever did in boardrooms. Serenia, once hidden and erased, now laughs freely, the sound soft but steady. She reads books aloud while the twins tug at her sleeves. She speaks at conferences, not because she wants recognition, but because her voice might save someone else's life. They didn't find each other in perfect conditions. They found each other in the rubble. He was power without peace. She was strength without safety. But when they came together, not through romance first, but through respect, they built something rare. Not just a home, not just a life, but a truth. Love, real love, asks for nothing and gives everything. It doesn't care if your past is spotless or shattered. It only asks, will you stay? Will you try? Will you grow together, even when the odds say don't? And they did. Their lives now are not perfect. There are diapers, sleepless nights, the occasional moment of doubt. But every morning, when Calum watches Serenia hold their daughters with the kind of tenderness he once believed the world had lost, he knows he didn't just save her, she saved him too. Not by asking him to change, but by showing him why change was worth it. In a world obsessed with appearances, titles, and status, their story reminds us that love lives in the quiet, in the choice to listen, in the courage to stay, in the soft places we protect when everything else feels loud. So if you're listening to this now, and you're waiting for your story to begin, remember this. You don't need perfection. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need one honest moment of compassion, one open door, one brave yes. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to change everything. If this story touched your heart, like it, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more powerful stories every week. Which part made you feel the most? Let's talk in the comments.